one wonders exactly what he means by that. His name has come up several times in terms of the Commission's investigations and in terms of testimony put before the Commission. And I think one of the key moments for me where the name came up specifically in his defense, I must say, was when Dr. Ben Ngubane of Eskom, also previously of Eskom, basically stated that Brian Molefe is one of the few individuals in the country who is a leading mind in terms of state-owned enterprises and who would be able to turn it around. This was a very strong defense for Brian Molefe. But when you look at what had happened when Brian Molefe was seconded to Eskom, we know that, in fact, he had been at Transnet before. And when you look at what has happened at Transnet, one wonders whether Dr. Ben Ngubane's assertions are actually quite true, because we know that Transnet was involved in very, very many questionable deals under Molefe's tenure, and now the parastatal finds itself in quite a lot of trouble. We see the same thing would have happened at Eskom. One wonders whether he walked into the middle of a storm in both instances, or whether there was something more untoward. But this is his moment, and this is the moment where he will have to answer to very many allegations. And we wait to hear what his side of the story is. And we know that with the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, people are given a fair chance to state their case. And when it comes particularly to Eskom, when you listen to the evidence that has been given, there is a lot to answer to.
You know, for his part, he says he's tried to write to the Commission on two separate occasions, in September last year and in December again. And basically the information that he's trying to get from the Commission is the documents that are relevant to his appearance there today. He says the Commission has yet to respond. Do we know whether in the interim that has changed, whether he now has access to these documents?
We don't know if that has changed as yet, Michelle, but one wouldn't pour cold water on what he is saying when you look at what happened in the Commission this week in terms of Anoj Singh, who was expected to appear before the Zondo Commission of Inquiry. We heard at the last minute when his legal team came forward and made an appeal to Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo to say, we have not been given any information in terms of which stream of evidence we're going to be testifying against. In fact, they say that they received that particular summons at the 11th hour. Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo was not impressed about that. So this would not necessarily be something that we would say that Brian Molefe and his legal team would be seeking to mislead the Commission of Inquiry. We know that the Commission of Inquiry has been working very hard to try and meet its deadlines. So it could be a case of maybe the pressures around that would be administrative pressures. Yeah, that's what it probably would boil down to.
So, I mean, if he does appear, and he will appear today, right? He will be there.
Absolutely.
As far as we know.
As far as we know, he'll be there.
So when he takes the stand this morning, he's going to respond to a whole range of issues, of course. Among them, that 2016 report by the then Public Protector Thuli Madonsela into Eskom's affairs. She, in that report, notes that phone records showed that Molefe and Ajay Gupta had called each other 88 times during a period of time. That Molefe's cell phone also placed him in the vicinity of the Saxonwold Gupta compound, and that was 19 times. Now, if we all cast our minds back to that time period, 2016, there was a lot being said about the Saxonwold shebeen.
Yes.
You know, many ministers admitted to being in Saxonwold.
Yes.
Who was it that said there's a shebeen in Saxonwold at the time? Do you remember?
I can't place it properly, but I think it was one of the ministers.
Someone as an excuse for this.
For their presence going to Saxonwold, trying to divert the fact that they were going to the Gupta residence.
By saying there is a shebeen.
Going to the shebeen. But I mean, regardless of who said that, Michelle, the issue is that you've heard about various other ministers going to Saxonwold, and when you look at the stream of evidence, a number of them,
actually,
very famously, Malusi Gaba's name was thrown into the hat, and every time they went there, we heard witnesses, including drivers who were driving the ministers, bodyguards, people who've testified in camera for fear of being, victimized, saying that when they drove there, they drove their principals there, who had bags of cash in the car, either receiving money or dropping off money at the Gupta residence. So it's very, very bizarre. And when you hear about the interactions there, they're very untoward. Some of those who've testified have also testified that those who went, their principals, whether it is CEOs of parastatals or government officials, went there after being summoned, receiving a phone call and had meetings at the Gupta residence. And the question was raised in the commission very many times by the evidence leaders, what meetings would they have, official meetings, outside of their premises when you look at the various streams of evidence. They were questioning why wouldn't an individual be invited onto the premises?
To a government office.
Absolutely,
Right.
to have an official meeting, what was discussed off-site. So this is very interesting. We'll wait to hear from Mr. Molefe if he had any encounters at the Saxonwold, Shebeen, as you've pointed out.
Indeed. Listen, Matsela Koko was also on the stand this week.
Yeah.
In which ways would the testimonies, or at least, let's say, the questions put to the two of them by evidence leaders, would they sort of overlap?
I think what would overlap in terms of the questions put to them would be this key issue about communication within the parastatal. Now, with Matsela Koko, what was very interesting was the fact that he was flabbergasted and astounded when he found out that there was an email address that was dealing with communications. It was called Infoport or Businessman. That was the name of the email address. Now, in his understanding, as he testified before the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, he believed that email belonged either to the chairman of the parastatal, and that this key communication that was happening was secure. Turns out that that particular email address was not an email address that belonged to the parastatal. So it turns out that it was an email address that was basically an external email address, by what we understand, and that key communications were being made.
Sure.
Mr. Koko was saying that as far as he knows, that information was being communicated with the chairman of the
It was meant to be privileged information.
It was meant to be privileged
Right.
information. So whether this info or businessman email address appears again in this line of testimony, I'm sure the question will be asked, is something that will be very, very interesting, because that would mean that the state-owned enterprises were compromised.
Yeah.
Because what the evidence leader, advocate Seleka, pointed out is that this businessman email could possibly be linked to one Salim Essa, who was a known Gupta enforcer, so he's referred to in the media, or a Gupta lieutenant or an ally. And Salim Essa's name has come up in various streams. He seems to have a knack of appearing and being placed in meetings that an ordinary individual who has nothing to do with parastatals would not even have information of. And so this is very, very, very key. And I think I'll be very interested to find out whether or not Mr. Molefe would have also had to have dealt with this particular email.
Tumaole Mohlaoli, just a few minutes that we have. It's scraping the surface of the state capture inquiry.
Just touching.
Especially when it comes to Eskom. But
Yes.
thanks very much for coming in and giving us some perspective of what we can expect today.